Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again, greater than ever before.
Among the journalists watching that closely in Washington was our Richard Madden. And Richard, point out some of the key moments for us.
Yeah, well, beyond the symbolism, the showmanship, and that patriotic backdrop you saw of American flags in the White House Rose Garden, a lot of emphasis was clearly on the messaging, which fits with this White House communication strategy as the president tries to sell this tariff agenda. But what really stood out was just how Trump tried to sell this. You saw him hold this game show size chart where he called out a list of nations that he says imposes lopsided tariffs on U.S. imports. And then he named the biggest offenders that he'll hit hardest with them, with some double-digit reciprocal tariffs that David mentioned moments ago. Some 34% on China, 20% on the European Union, a key strategic American ally, 25% on South Korea, Taiwan, and India. As we've been reporting throughout the afternoon, Canada and Mexico was not on that chart or the 8-page handout afterwards, so that did kind of give a sense that from Canada's perspective, it's status quo. Canada appears to have evaded the wrath of these latest reciprocal tariffs, but clearly Canada is not out of the woods yet. We heard Trump riff on Canada, repeating his grievances and making those false claims against Canada's protected dairy sector, but he also insisted, look, he could have been more severe to his adversaries and allies with his tariff rollout, but he chose not to. I think we can play what he had to say in his speech earlier today.
We will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that.
Okay, so while Canada may have been spared somewhat, if you can use that word, Trump's tariffs on cars and car parts, are still on the table, and those separate tariffs on steel and aluminum remain. So, Liberation Day from Donald Trump's perspective, but a lot of worries remain north of the border.
And also, that was a long news conference, not a lot of actual useful detail, some claims, and you mentioned one of them, that don't stand up to, fact-checking, and a lot of uncertainty afterwards, right? And we're in an uncertain time now. Let's move on to a related but separate topic here, Richard. When you and I spoke yesterday, the Democrats in the Senate had put forward a resolution, technically to try to stop all this, but really the strategy was to put some Republican senators on the record. Where does all that stand?
Yeah, and from that perspective, Ian, that succeeded. It appears that this resolution is going to pass with the help from Republicans, and the vote is happening underway as we speak. And Ian, this is the first sign of political pushback from Trump's own party. At least 4, possibly 5 Republicans have joined Democrats in this symbolic vote, calling to end the national emergency declaration along the northern border over fentanyl. That's what Trump used to justify his tariffs on the first place. And the Republicans who are joining Democrats are from the border states, Alaska, Montana, Maine, and also from farm country, Kentucky. And it was Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, he's a Republican, but he's more of a libertarian, really blasting Trump's tariff agenda on the Senate floor, calling it an abuse of power. Why is he targeting a key ally like Canada, saying Canada's a great customer? Senator Paul went on to say he wants the Canadians to buy more of their stuff. He calls it a crazy notion to put a 25% tariffs on Canada. Now, while this resolution, as symbolic as it is, will likely stall in the House because it has to be taken up by the House Republican leadership, that is unlikely. But the fact that Republicans joined Democrats really sends a rare show of oppositions against Trump's signature tariff policy that he unveiled down the street on Pennsylvania Avenue. So we're going to see what the vote is at the end, but if more than 4, possibly 5 Republicans join, wow, that is a significant message by the Republicans.
One of the things I was struck by, Richard, during this news conference is how many questions remained at the end as I was watching it. And then I watched reporters as they were scrambling to try to figure out what it really meant. And I was thinking, contrasting that with covering budgets, let's say, in Canada, federal or provincial, where there's a lockup and you get all the details, you can ask all the questions, then you can, as reporters, with confidence, be able to tell people who are watching what's going on. Here, how easy has it been for you in Washington to get meaningful details on these tariffs?
Yeah, Ian, it's challenging. Welcome to Trump's America. There's a real restriction for what reporters can ask questions. We're seeing a trend happening, not just at the White House, but the State Department, of pro-Trump media getting the premier seats in briefing rooms and so forth. But I have to say, the White House at least acknowledges our questions. We do get a response. But the last 3 tariff announcements, really, there were challenges and confusion and questions. Donald Trump does a great job selling his agenda. We saw today, whether you agree or disagree with him, he is an excellent communicator. Americans either love him or they hate him, and his communication cuts through cable news and in media. But scratch beyond the surface of what he says to try to get details behind it has been quite challenging. We did get a fact sheet from the White House shortly after Trump spoke today that answered some questions, but not all of them. It was a similar challenge we had when President Trump announced those surprise tariffs on cars and car parts. A lot of questions on how does this apply under the integrated auto sector that should be covered theoretically under the USMCA. It took hours to get more clarity. And it's not just reporters being confused. I mean, this uncertainty on again, off again tariff war that Trump has stoked is really rattling markets. Markets continue to move and react to all his announcements. They lost all the indexes, I believe, have lost a lot of points today on Wall Street. So it has been a real challenge. But if there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, he loves to put on a show. He loves the symbolism. He loves the flags. He was surrounded by it today in the Rose Garden during his announcement, holding up that chart. But it took a long time to get details on this monumental tariff agenda that he announced today.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much for a little bit of that context. So my next guest is one of those people who has been busy trying to figure this announcement out. William Pellerin is a partner for international trade at Macmillan LLP. He joins me now from Ottawa. William, what's it been like for you and maybe your staff members trying to figure out exactly what this executive order says?
It's been a full-time job for a large number of us, just try to figure it out. That's for sure. And then what it means and what Canada will do in response, right? So ultimately, it certainly looks like Canada dodged a bullet today, but we're still bleeding from earlier wounds imposed by the United States with respect to steel and aluminum. The 25% tariff that still applies to some goods, and then autos kicking in tomorrow. So
yeah, so
we're
quickly,
certainly not out of the woods. Yes.
Yeah. So quickly then, today's announcement where Trump had that big board up and listed all those countries, Canada wasn't on there. Some huge percentage tariffs against various countries around the world. We weren't on that board because, and I just want to confirm this with you, Canada is not subject to those additional tariffs, right?
That's right. So basically what happened after the fact, and we received confirmation of this through the fact sheet, is effectively that the tariff with respect to Canada that was imposed way back in early March continues to apply, that 25% across the board tariff, subject to goods that meet this special USMCA CUSMA trade agreement rules. Are exempt. So that stays in place. So long as that stays in place, we're not going to be subject to these reciprocal tariffs that Trump just imposed against all other countries.
So 25% on steel and aluminum, 25% on autos, though, as David Cochran pointed out, if they have American parts, then that will reduce the 25%. I mean, what are you telling your clients, or I guess maybe more to the point, what are they asking you right now about how they should be navigating all of these tariffs?
So there's a number of different components. So I, as a Canadian trade lawyer, deal a lot in what's coming north into Canada, which has a lot to do with Canada's retaliation to these tariffs. So Canada has retaliated on March 3rd, March 4th rather, Canada retaliated on March 13th, and we were expecting a round of retaliation today. We think that might be paused now, given that there wasn't too much further hit, except with respect to autos. So wait and see on what Canada will do, but we're doing all sorts of work on making sure that the tariff classifications are right, making sure that the origin of the goods are well understood, because it really matters when you have these very complex supply chains to understand ultimately what rules apply and what country gets kind of that identity, what the good must be associated with a given country for the purpose of assessing all of these duties, both coming north and going south. So it's a real exercise of trying to figure out all of these different customs classifications, how to value these goods for customs purposes, and what is the origin of those goods.
1 year ago, if we had this conversation talking about trade between Canada and the United States, you'd be telling me about how goods flow so freely across the border, particularly in the auto sector. All of a sudden that has shifted. It's like, people talk about this seismic impact. It is like a massive earthquake. From a trade lawyer's perspective, what are the impacts going to be on Canada?
These are massive. I mean, you're absolutely right. We are talking to some of the largest North American companies or global companies operating in North America, and they have no idea what a tariff would do to their supply chain. And that's not because they're not sophisticated parties. It's just it's never come up as a possibility. They've been trading, they've been shipping goods through contracts as if the border did not exist. They wouldn't even know in some cases who would actually have to pay the duty at the border, or whether there's some contractual clause that allows one party to impose the duty cost on another. No one has thought about this in 20 plus years. And so sometimes it's actually going back to the contract, reading it and trying to understand who actually bears liability here. And these are some of the most sophisticated companies. So, the small and medium enterprises, frankly, are struggling, and that's not a surprise. So it's going to have a massive impact across the board for all Canadian companies for a long time to come.
Well, not surprisingly, you seem to be working late tonight. I'm sure a lot of trade lawyers are. William, thank you very much for speaking with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
William Pellerin, a partner for international trade at McMillan LLP.